I wanted to talk about something that I've been curious about, especially this week: labels. Uh, I started this weeks, months over the summer. Uh, and basically, what I do is psychological assessment. So I give people IQ tests, academic testing, attention tests, all of these different things for the Academic Success Center and the Disability Resource Center at UNLV. And so what I do is I take all these test results, I put them together, and typically what I have to do is give someone a label and put a name on this cluster of, you know, scores and their performance on these different measures. And I've really been thinking this week about what that means and what a label can do for someone's identity and personality and all of these pieces that sometimes we don't think of when we think of labels. And why do we give labels? And we think about the world that we live in, and there is so much information coming in at us at any given time. It's constant, it's chaotic, it's just so much stimuli. There's no way we could possibly attend to all of it at the same time. And so we as humans tend to look for patterns. We want to make sense of this crazy, chaotic world, and we want to put it all together. And so we tend to give labels. And we see some labels as good, and we also see some labels as damaging. And one thing that I think of when I think of like trends in the field of psychology right now, the first thing that really pops into my mind is autism spectrum disorder. So there was this sort of push away from categories, and so we put autism on a spectrum, and someone exists somewhere along that spectrum. And in doing some autism assessments, I really saw like that is almost more confusing for people to say, okay, you're in this category, but I can't give you more specifics about where you are, being on that category. And what we see, particularly like autism, is there's potentially like clusters in the autism spectrum where people might land. But by condensing it, like we have as a field in the DSM 5, and perhaps we're making it more confusing or more damaging to not have accurate labels. So sometimes that's the most confusing or damaging or hurtful part, is when a label isn't accurate and it doesn't seem to fit our identity or who we are. And I think that piece is tying in how labels make sense for ourselves and figuring out how that works in our identity. And I think of Insight 8, like the primal personality assessment. It gives you a label, it gives you a profile of the kind of values that you have and the kinds of things that matter to you and your core motivations. And it's an interesting concept. We're saying that there are 8 profiles of people throughout the world who fit into these categories. And yet, when you read those results, it does make sense. Like, those things are valuable, and maybe in different ways for different people. However, I think that having sort of the base profile makes so much more sense, as you go through life and you think of the values that are important. If you have sort of a baseline, a framework, being able to fit inside that framework makes so much sense. And I think of Mar's new article on the blog, her new post about being a millennial, and she speaks obviously from a millennial perspective, and so am I. But we talk about sort of potentially like damaging labels, or labels that you might not want to fit into a category. Like, as a millennial, you read or see so many videos disparaging millennials as a cohort and as a group of all these terrible like traits that we possess. And it's sort of this hatred of like, oh, those millennials, I can't believe them. And yet it is such a new and unprecedented generation that is growing into this culture that is changing the world and making the world different and better. And I think that we as millennials get sort of a bad name for that for whatever reason. And I think that was something that struck me when I was reading Mar's post, is like, wow, like I'm a millennial and I have this sort of stereotype against millennials, and it's like, why do we allow that label to be tarnished or fit that way? So that's something that I've been thinking about this week. Maybe you have an answer for me. Maybe people want to see a pattern in behaviors and understand why we as a generation are inventing ways to make the world easier, and that's confusing to see something different, to see something that breaks that pattern. So that's what I've got for you to think on this week. Check out Mar's new post on the blog at inside8.com. Take the test. What's your label? And let me know how it fits for you. I'll see you next week.